What gives the historical Jesus so much cultural staying power? Hi, everybody. My name is Robyn Walsh. I'm a scholar of New Testament and early Christianity and part of Paths in Biblical Studies. Throughout the month of September, I've been promoting our forthcoming New Insights into the New Testament conference. That's the NINT. Go over to bartehrman.com/NINT. Use the promo code Robyn, ROBYN, to both get a discount on signing up for the conference. Again, starts next week. But also, you will be automatically signed up for an AMA, and Ask Me Anything, that's going to take place on September 29th at 7 p.m. Eastern. So anybody, again, who uses that promo code Robyn will both get a discount on signing up for the conference as a whole, but also get that opportunity to have a Zoom session with me where you can ask me anything about the Bible, and I will do my best to answer your questions. Now, I've been interfacing with all of the scholars throughout this month by looking at their abstracts, what they're proposing to talk about, but also, my knowledge of their work, and then kind of giving you my own take. I don't have any kind of forecasting that I can do on exactly what people will talk about, but, I'm using that as a launching point. And today I actually want to talk about our keynote speaker's proposed talk, Elaine Pagels. And I'm going to read you a little bit from her abstract, just kind of starting with her question. And she says, why then does his story, so the historical Jesus' story, hold so much appeal for so many people? Reflecting on the New Testament Gospels, the Gnostic Gospels, and other first and second century sources, we look for answers. Which elements of the Jesus story appeal to people today, to artists, filmmakers, poets, to new converts? What is it that gives these stories their staying power for thousands of years? Now, I can imagine some of the passages she might talk about. And so I want to do something a little bit different today, which is actually talk about how Jesus is physically depicted, how the historical Jesus is often physically depicted in things like film, but also art. And the reason I want to do this is because that seems to me to be a particularly malleable part of our information or our knowledge base about the historical Jesus. And what's particularly interesting about it is that if you do look at any of the Gospels, I'm thinking both about canonical and non-canonical, so-called Gnostic Gospels too, you really don't get much of a physical description, if at all, especially in the canonical Gospels, of what Jesus looked like. By the way, that's very odd for a biography. That you wouldn't get some kind of physical description or idea of what it would be like to be around that person at the very least. You certainly get that with someone like Alexander the Great. Now, I think this is one way that Jesus has sort of adapted to different times and places and peoples and cultures. And the reason I say, even when we go back to the earliest Christian art, and hopefully we'll be able to show some images here, when we first start to get a physical depiction of Jesus, he very interestingly looks a lot like a traditional Roman male, but even somebody who's kind of like an elite Roman male. I'm thinking here of someone like the Emperor Augustus, even something like his body posture, his short hair, he's clean shaven. He looks very much like a member of the imperial family. And so maybe that's communicating something about him being an earthly leader. Later on, when Jesus starts to get something like the beard or the longer hair in portraiture, that would be expected of someone like a philosopher or somebody like Zeus, like Jupiter. So somebody like a high god. There's something being communicated there too, as well, most likely. So whatever workshop you go to, whatever artisan you've asked to create, say, your sarcophagus or a fresco or a mosaic, there's going to be certain kinds of inflection points, certain kinds of symbols, certain kinds of tropes that they're going to play on. And those start to make their way into a different kind of presentation of Jesus. And therefore, it says something potentially about a theological understanding of him. So now let's fast forward to modernity. I don't think anybody would argue with me too much if I were to say that the Jesus of today, you do expect him to have long brown hair and a beard. Sometimes I do see him depicted with blonde hair and blue eyes. That is highly unlikely. I mean, it's impossible, really, given where he was born and what we know about his heritage, about the local communities within West Asia from where he hails. So that definitely says something about power struggles and race today. And there's a lot of great bibliography, and I could talk more about this in another video. But when we have a Jesus that looks, and I don't know how else to put this, but subjectively attractive in something like a movie, there's something there about economics, right? You're not going to necessarily go to a movie where you don't have a leading man, a leading man type. But I'm thinking about something like The Passion of the Christ, or there have been a lot of television series lately where the person depicting Jesus is physically attractive, physically appealing. It's interesting that that fights against a few things. One is that the Messiah was predicted actually to not be physically attractive. You should be attracted to the message of the Messiah, not the physical person. So, what's being said there? When we have a Jesus that, you can't quite say he's got abs and biceps because he's like working in carpentry, he certainly wasn't always depicted this way. There is a theological statement earlier on. I'm thinking here about, medieval into early modern periods where Jesus was actually quite frail on the cross. And that was saying something about him being his physical self as being a sacrifice on the cross, and that the physical self is of lesser importance when he is depicted as quite skinny or frail on the cross. You do see this shift to a more physically fit Jesus actually in the modern period after around the Victorian period and what was considered sort of a muscular Christianity is sometimes the term that's used, but a period within Christianity and especially post-industrialization, where the idea of having to be physically engaged is part of Christian practice. This idea that you shouldn't just, again, industrialization, just let machines do your work for you, or that people are no longer kind of working out in the fields or doing physical labor. And so things like the YMCA, the Young Men's Christian Association, rises up around this period in time, and things like basketball, football start to become increasingly important as national pastimes, football on Sunday, because they are part of an idea of how to be a whole physical person. And that physical fitness goes along with certain kinds of religious practice. There's, again, a lot of great scholarship on this. And I don't think, coincidental that we get iconography of Jesus where he starts to look more physically fit around the time that muscular Christianity becomes a movement. So interesting to consider, I think, how Jesus is depicted does tend to correspond. It's flexible enough to correspond with societal and cultural expectations at various times and periods in time, and that theology can shift along with it. So I don't think that's what Pagels is going to talk about, Dr. Pagels, but it's something that did spring to mind for me when I read her abstract. Again, go to bartehrman.com/NINT. Use that promo code Robyn, ROBYN, to sign up for the conference. We have a really terrific lineup of scholars, and I hope to see you at my open Q&A. So again, that will be September 29th at 7 p.m. Eastern, and I hope to see you at the conference.